The reality is 2 or 3 people can't do the projects, the cybersecurity, advance the business, and keep the business running day in and day out. The business decision makers are looking at that IT manager and saying, well, can't you do this? So it doesn't feel okay for them to say, no, I need some help with this. But the reality is they do.
They also can't be available 24/7.
Some of our worst security events that we've come in and helped with later were the result of an IT team that was stretched thin, but didn't feel it was okay to say we need external help.
Welcome back to another episode of Unraveling IT, Expert Tech Talks. I'm Garrett Wiesenberg, VP of Solutions Consulting here at Corsica Technologies, and I'm joined today by our CEO, Brian Harmison, to have a very important and timely discussion: how to recession-proof your business through smart technology investments. With all the concerns surrounding the tariffs, inflation, and just recent, uncertainty in the economic markets, understanding where you can really be smart and lean within your business is something that every business should be discussing and thinking through right now. So, welcome, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. Nice to be here.
Great.
And I think you're right on. Not that we necessarily need an excuse to consider our investments or our cost structure within our businesses. But I think when business is booming and economic times and winds are favorable, we tend to maybe be a little bit looser in our cost control. And then when events happen, like we've had happen over the last quarter related to tariffs, it's a good time to go back and evaluate where we're spending money, how we're spending it. I know we're doing that here at Corsica, make sure that we're being responsible. And IT and technology spend is, it's a pretty big line item for most businesses now.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and dive in. How would you describe the current economic landscape? I mean, as a CEO, what are you seeing out there today that has you concerned or is making you think twice?
Uncertainty. I think that's the one word that sums up where we're at today. Uncertainty about what the long-term impacts of things like tariffs will be, uncertainty about things like supply chain and how are we going to see the manufacturing businesses here that rely on those foreign suppliers impacted. Is that going to start to hit revenue? Are we going to see things that we want to purchase for our business become either unavailable or really expensive? Or are we going to see some import-export delays and holdups? Early indicators are those exporting out of the countries with the highest tariffs, like China, are putting the brakes on because they're assuming their products won't sell. So as I talk with business leaders in our customer base, uncertainty and caution is the main theme. Many of them today are still feeling good effects of the tariffs. There tends to be kind of a surge early on of I better buy what I might need this year now.
Yeah, I think we've actually seen a few cases of that. Clients reaching out and asking, we'll buy 10 firewalls or we'll buy, 5 servers or whatever it may be. They're trying to get that in prior to the tariffs going into effect.
Yeah, and then their customers are doing the same thing in a lot of those cases as well.
Yeah.
So time will tell how long we're going to not know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But the point remains, it's a good opportunity to really kind of tighten the belt a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking about the tariffs specifically, have you seen any surges in pricing on any of the equipment to date?
We really haven't, and Garrett, you and I talk about this a lot, and keep kind of weekly tabs on what's changing and what we see as kind of the most common items, and we really haven't seen fluctuations in price or in lead time yet. So it's still as of today, while we're recording this, not a bad time to buy. We're not necessarily advising against buying what you feel you might need in those businesses where that technology is really critical for the operations. You mentioned a few buying, wireless and firewalls and other things. those are really the growth-focused businesses that are planning ahead maybe for their future acquisitions this year, for the things that they have going on. It's very wise to buy now. If you have it in your capital budget, it wouldn't hurt to buy it now instead of later.
We've talked a little bit about the tariffs already. Inflation is also another concern that, I continually hear about. And while I think inflation, year over year isn't rising like it was in years past, what avenues or other areas, should we expect to see inflation hit, like SaaS products, for instance? Are we seeing an increase in cost with, Microsoft licensing or Adobe licensing, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, we can expect prices to always go up.
They don't go down often.
And as everyone continues to adopt the recurring revenue model, they oftentimes get that model started with a lower entry point than what it's going to take long term, and specifically around the technology that's now being built into a lot of those SaaS products. The prices and price points are increasing. AI is a great example of that. Mm-hmm. We're seeing the price point of the AI being used in these SaaS applications growing very rapidly and not being offset by other revenue streams. So that's requiring the SaaS providers to increase those prices. As far as the kind of general effects of inflation, we really haven't seen a big impact on what we do beyond the normal wage increases that we see and cost of living increases that our teams see across our client base and of course here at Corsica as well.
So you've mentioned, these SaaS providers including more into their products, and what they're adding in is intended to, add more value and also help maximize efficiencies within, the product set that they're selling. Does that lead to, reductions at all, or how should you be thinking of your, employee count?
Yeah, as far as the SaaS provider capabilities, a lot of those really are meant to automate more the simple or mundane tasks. And so as we see those adopted, there usually is an opportunity to either reskill or repurpose some of your workforce that maybe was doing some of those tasks that now can be automated. I'd say the adoption of those things and then the move to make labor changes is pretty slow compared to what it could be. Yeah. But it definitely presents that opportunity. And I think for most of us in our businesses, our biggest expense is people. And we want to be really responsible with that expense in a couple of ways. One is we don't want to carry any labor expense beyond what's required in the business. That's kind of the basic one. But what's becoming a bigger emerging trend is that we want those people working on the right things and meaningful things. That's becoming a much more important aspect to a younger workforce than maybe just compensation was 10, 15 years ago. And AI plays a really strategic part in that. And that younger workforce is also really interested in leveraging those tools.
So they want to feel like they're making a difference. They don't just want to come in and do mundane tasks day in and day out, go home, collect their paycheck.
Yeah, maybe another example of that, if you take a factory example, there was a time where people were willing to work the overtime to make extra money, especially as they were maybe beginning a new role, or they're looking at that and saying, my time is more valuable to me than working that overtime. And so we have to find really smart ways to increase that productivity and give them more of that meaningful work and a little better work-life balance.
That makes sense. When it comes to, since we're on the topic of staffing, what do you see most organizations doing from an IT department perspective specifically? I mean, are they reducing their IT teams? Are they outsourcing where possible? What's that look like?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we had a real shortage of technology people. In 2020, it was very hard to find talent. There were a lot of folks that were working either remotely or in alternate kind of models or businesses. And there were also a lot of large corporations that had really large IT teams. we're seeing that shift towards a much leaner, more focused team that's focused more on the culture of the business and what the business needs day in and day out, and less on the specialties. So most of the businesses we work with are in that small to mid-sized range. They're not enterprises, they're not public companies. And so they aren't usually able to find and hire the expertise, a network admin. It might not make sense for their business to have a full-time network admin. Instead, they bring in people who are really focused on the productivity and the use of their line of business applications, AI, business analytics, how do they handle their data within that business. And those people tend to be very focused on the end users and their productivity, and then look to an MSSP or an MSP or an outsource model for more of the heavy lifting and specialized disciplines.
So you're seeing more of a co-managed approach.
Yeah, I don't really like co-managed
yeah.
as a term, but that is the industry lingo for that. I look at it and think, as we think about the cost structure of our business, we have to decide which investments are the right ones and where. And one of the things that we see is a lot of IT managers, they view successful IT management by how many people they're managing, not necessarily the technology that they're managing. And so that distinction is really important, because if we're a manager of technology as an IT manager, then certainly we're managing people too that are part of the people, process, and technology that traditionally makes up IT. But we're maybe missing out on the opportunity to leverage some of those domain experts in an outsourced capacity.
Brian, can you give me a recent example or practical use case of where an organization has recently made some of those adjustments or begun to look into making those adjustments?
Yeah, sure. I think the first part of that is understanding, am I even overall spending what I should be spending within my business? And that's a question we get a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm optimized. I don't know if I'm spending what I should be. Am I overspending? Am I underspending? And it feels like a big investment maybe to a CFO, but it might be or it might not be, depending on what that team's accomplishing and how it's structured. And so one of the things that we do pretty often is say, well, tell us about who your team is today, and let's talk about if that makes sense. And a recent example, manufacturing company that we talked to, and they had about 7 people on their IT team, and those people had really broad disciplines, and 3 of them were more focused on the general end user support, and the other 4, including IT manager, were more on strategy, or maybe it's network engineering and system admin and server engineer. And as we look at an environment like that, there's just not enough work for a system admin or a network engineer to really do in their discipline. And oftentimes those people also aren't real willing to roll up their sleeves maybe and do something outside that discipline, because they've chosen that path for a reason. And so what ends up happening is this feeling of, we're spending a lot, I don't know what they're really doing, and the things that are important to maybe a CFO or a CEO aren't getting done. Meanwhile, those people are busy. Nobody's claiming that they're not. It's just an example of not allocating the right resources in kind of the right places. And so, when we look at that environment, we say, well, one, you should really be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish with 2 or 3 IT people, and then look to another party, like a Corsica or someone else who can do a couple of things for you. One is they can execute the larger projects and do so within a defined time frame. We see these large IT teams struggle to get things done because they're constantly pulled into the day-to-day away from that project. And so it's the same reason a manufacturing facility hires somebody to build them a new building. They don't hire all the different parties and have them work for them and build them a building. They look to someone who's, they build buildings, and I need a building, I need it by this date. And for whatever reason, we see a lot of CFOs and CEOs not treat IT that way. They treat it as, well, kind of a both and situation. My team should be able to do everything they do on a normal basis and get all these projects done. It doesn't happen. It's very, very rare that we see those happen. That's one area, focus your team truly on what needs to be done day to day, and let those specialty items be done by specialists. Don't hire the specialists to do them once or twice and then hope you can keep them busy, because you're really paying for something that you don't need in that case.
Yep.
So we expect that team to be down to 2 or 3 people. Hire a cybersecurity provider, whether that's an outsourced SOC, an MSSP, an MSP that does SOC services, which they all do now. That really builds a model that's really lean, really efficient. And in their case, we'll likely save them about $500,000 a year by the time all is said and done and those transitions happen. And,
Wow.
and so it's a significant amount of money that, think of what you can do with that $500,000 targeted towards marketing or targeted towards sales, or maybe it's product development. It's a substantial savings. So, I'd say if you have an IT team that's more than that 2 or 3, think about or engage with someone who can give you some of those options. If you only have 2 or 3 people and you're not getting outside help, chances are you're not in the state you think you are. So the opposite is true too. And we've seen this many times, Garrett, which is you go in and there's a lot of things that are being assumed that the IT team is doing. And the reality is 2 or 3 people can't do the projects, can't do the cybersecurity, can't advance the business and keep the business running day in and day out. And a lot of times it's not safe for those IT managers to say I need help, because the business decision makers are looking at that IT manager and saying, well, can't you do this? You're the IT people. And so it doesn't feel okay for them to say, no, I need some help with this. But the reality is they do. I mean, one person, 2 people, they just can't know everything there is to know in today's technology landscape.
They also can't be available 24/7.
Well, and they certainly don't want to be.
Exactly. I mean, they need to take PTO once in a while, or get sick, or have a weekend.
Yeah. And some of our worst security events that we've come in and helped with later were the result of an IT team that was stretched too thin, but didn't feel it was okay to say we need external help.
So we talked about some of the cost savings, and I think you might have even hit on kind of my next question, but what are some of the other benefits of partnering with somebody else, or looking externally for assistance?
Business continuity is a huge one. The average IT person stays at their job for 18 months. That's not very long. That's about, if I think about starting a new job and what that looks like, 18 months is about the time you feel like you're really starting to hit your stride and know what you need to know. And so for those that have smaller teams, having a partner who really is owning and responsible for the continuity of that environment is really valuable. And it's so common for us to talk to a business leader or decision maker, and they say, I feel kind of held captive. The people usually aren't doing that on purpose. It's the environment that they've created, and they being more the leadership of that organization, to say this all rests on this person. And so a lot of times that stems from a leadership decision. I've been focused on, how do I save money in IT? Well, I save money in IT by keeping that budget really tight, not asking how can we grow what we're doing in technology. And then what happens is that person tends to get burned out. When they leave, then you have all this tribal knowledge walk out the door with them and end up in a really tough spot. So having a partner that's working with you, that's a business that has longevity and that can bring that continuity as people come and go, because that's the natural thing that happens. Part of our goal here is to grow and develop people, and we realize part of that next step for them in that path might be going to another organization. We want to support them in that. And so we all need to be thinking about, what does succession planning look like on our IT team? And usually it's, no, I just need to hang on to this person and hope that nothing happens. And, things happen. People win the lottery, not very often. More often than not, they find a new opportunity that they're excited about, and we as employers want to be in a position where we can be excited for them. And part of the way businesses can do that is by having a partner who's going to ensure that as that person transitions to their new role, somebody new can come in, join the team, and be super productive.
Is that also a way for an organization to stay agile during this time of uncertainty?
It definitely is. Anything you can do to have some variable optionality in the way your cost structure is in place. It's a lot easier to work with a company and say, hey, we've hit some kind of tough times right now, and so we need to change the scope or the magnitude of what we do with you. That's easier to do than firing people. And as you grow, the inverse is true as well. So how can we expand those resources quickly? And a partner can help you do that.
We've talked about, what businesses can do kind of in the moment, what some of the trends are, and the way some of the outlooks are, uncertain. We don't really know where things are going to go. Looking forward, what can businesses be doing now to prepare them for coming out of this time of uncertainty, whether it's, good or bad? Is there something tactical they could implement today or be looking at?
Yeah, it's really around being ready. And, I touched on it a little bit ago, which is, how am I going to scale as a business? And that's a great problem to have, which is how do I grow fast enough to meet the maybe new demands that are coming from changes in the external environment. And a partnership is a great way to do that. And consistently we see not just people in IT, but in other areas of technology struggle with what does the vision look like for the future? Where can we go? How can we grow this? And so a lot of businesses feel like IT's holding them back. And we joke about CFOs being CFNOs. Well, usually it's the IT team that's saying no to more than anyone else, and that typically comes from a combination of capacity and knowledge. They don't want to say, and we're wired, whether you're a network admin or a sysadmin, people don't want to say, I don't know how to do that, because ultimately we recognize we can go figure it out. We can find a way. That's not always the most efficient way, and not always what's best for our business. So understanding how we can grow and scale quickly comes from having some external input from someone who's been there, seen that happen, and done that before. And so it's getting that right combination of really knowledge and vision of how can we expand the way we use technology quickly.
I think I have one final question for you.
Okay.
So these organizations that we've talked about hypothetically, how do they go about finding an external partner? Are there certain criteria that they should be looking at? Is there like just a website with, the help wanted sort of ads? Like how do they get in contact with someone?
Yeah, I think, one, do your homework. We live in a world where reviews rule the world. Look at those common sites for technology industry. GT is a great example of that in our industry and across others, but look for those external proof points. AI is another good place to go, and use some of the AI search to help you find a partner who can work with you. But I think a lot of this comes down to, look for someone who's built a strong external presence, has a good team, because what we've talked about a lot here is how do I expand my knowledge in my team. Well, you don't want to expand it by 5, you want to expand it by 50, because there's that much depth in what we do to need more experts across the board, so that you have someone that you can really turn to and say, here's what I'm facing, how do I navigate through this, how do I help make my IT team be successful as we navigate through, maybe it's our next growth wave or an acquisition. So those are the places to go look first. You can always Google, but we all kind of look alike
at face value.
Yeah, from what we offer, but find those that have the proof points, awards, certifications, good reviews, those types of things.
Well, I appreciate you joining me today and talking through this timely topic, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks, Garrett.
Thank you.